City Tribe's on location at the Property Investor Show. I'm on the Shawbrook Bank stand with Stephen Johnson. And Stephen, a very large turnout today, and I think it's landlords coming to find solutions.
Yeah, I think that's right. We had a talk earlier, and there's a lot going on. A lot of changes happened at the back end of last year. So I think people are still sort of interpreting those and digesting those. Obviously, you've got things going on in the economy with the election now. So I think it's a really good show because everyone's coming along and looking to sort of talk about some of the issues that they're facing, really.
Indeed. It's a good place to kind of get a feeling of what's going on in the industry and what's on people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always like coming because I tend to pick up a bit, obviously things that we worry about or think about, but I always like hearing from other people what's on their minds. And I think it's a source of really good content. Obviously, a few people selling a few things, but there's also quite a lot of useful content.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the general election, and of course it was very snap. It really was. We weren't really expecting it.
Yeah.
What are your views on how the property market is going to react to that? Because previous elections have shown that it kind of goes into a kind of hibernation mode until the outcome's clear.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think last election there was quite a lot of hiatus because I think there was, some uncertainty about the result, and at the time there was a lot of talk about stamp duty changes, mansion tax, rent controls. I'm not sure there's that so much worry about that now, maybe because people think that the outcome is less, or maybe more, people are more confident that they think that Conservatives may be successful. They're less worried about the alternative. Having said that, if you look at last year, no one called any election right, so I guess we need to be careful about thinking things are a foregone conclusion. But I don't think there's any of those black clouds that probably may influence people. Also, it's a short running, isn't it? She announced it, and before you know it, it'll be here. So in some ways, then it doesn't have enough time for people to kind of, worry so much about what might happen. So I don't think it'll have a big impact. And I think also people are probably starting getting used to dealing and living with uncertainty now. And if you was to stop doing anything because things were uncertain, you probably wouldn't do anything for a long time. So for those reasons, I don't think it'll have that much of an impact on the property market.
I hear what you're saying. I think it's interesting to maybe consider how important housing will be in the manifestos, because Labour have hinted actually today that they may introduce rent controls, and I watched a live broadcast by UKIP this morning. They didn't mention housing at all, but I noticed on the Facebook comments there were a lot of people saying, what's your housing policy? Do you think that all of the parties should make housing a big priority? And they could win votes if they speak out against Section 24, because landlord vote is ready for the taking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that. I think housing absolutely, is a massively important issue for society and the economy, because ultimately, without effective housing, it affects the productivity and the attractiveness. And if we're going to be outside of Europe, finding our own way in the world, we need to have a compelling story, and I think, we need to be productive and efficient, and housing, doesn't work. However, housing's a London and South East problem, really, not a national problem, and I think sometimes, you can confuse the national issue with actually where the real concentration and issues are. So housing, I think, is enormously important. It always has been, though, if you think about it. I don't think you've ever seen anything that hasn't been a pledge of how much new houses are going to be built. Do people believe that they'll ever do anything about it and make it happen? Question mark. So housing is a very important issue and should feature on everyone's manifesto. I think there's a shift. I think there's been a shift in the sort of Conservative government towards the private rented sector. I think in the housing paper that came out in Feb, it was quite clear now that recognise that the private rented sector is here to stay, and it's got an important part to play, and it isn't necessarily the landlord's fault that homeowners can't get on the housing market, which I think has been a little bit of the rhetoric before, and I applaud that, and I think we do need a healthy private rented sector. I think some of the issues, I went to a breakfast last week, and there's clearly, I think, a lot of focus on institutional money coming into private rented sector, and I think, I've seen some forecasts where institutional money private rented will be the third largest asset class for investors in the next 5 to 10 years. So that will have quite an impact on private landlords in terms of other supply coming into the market and how does it affect them. So I think it's good to see that private rented sectors maybe not being seen as a problem, but actually as part of a healthy housing market. Clearly, the interest tax relief is a particularly penal thing that is unfair through its retrospective nature. Will that influence how people vote? Possibly. I think the problem is too many other things going on for that to be the main thing that people vote on. But let's see.
I think, traditionally landlords have voted Conservative, and I think from what we're seeing on Property Tribes and other forums that lots of landlords have lost faith with the Conservative, and I'm not sure what the alternative is for landlords. No. But obviously we have to look at the bigger picture because it's not just about our livelihood.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you say, it's one issue, isn't it? But there's a lot of issues for the society, for people to reflect on, and with exiting Europe and so forth. So whilst I know that a lot of people are disappointed in that policy and the unfairness of that policy, will that be the overarching deciding factor when people come to the ballot box? And I don't know. And there's lots of other, I guess if you had slightly more confidence in a credible alternative, maybe then that may have a different influence. But I guess some of the reasons they've decided to go to the polls now is they feel fairly confident that a lot of there isn't, the opposition isn't as credible as it sometimes is right now. So we'll see.
Well, moving on, I thought it'd be useful just to chat with you, Stephen, about the sort of second part of the implementation of the PRA, because obviously thanks to your contribution in creating education about this, but there's kind of more to come, isn't there, later in the year?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. We spent some time on it on our session earlier today. The standard, there's two things that the standard introduced. One was the changes to stress rates and cover ratios, which came in at the beginning of this year, and a lot of energy and focus and a lot of attention was on that. But come September this year, there's a second part of that standard, which requires a specialist underwrite for landlords with 4 or more mortgage properties, which I think really makes the distinction between an investor and a professional landlord now concrete in the market. It's always existed, but lenders have had different interpretations of where that line should be drawn, and now the regulator's done it for everyone. And therefore, I do think you're going to find an increasing number of landlords in the commercial market rather than the retail buy-to-let market. They're going to have more questions. They're going to be asked. Lenders are going to have to consider their wider portfolio. Lenders are going to consider their accounts, their cash flow, their track record, their experience. It's going to be more of a business underwrite than maybe a tick box sort of mortgage process, which they may have been used to in the retail buy-to-let market. So that's going to be quite a change. And I think if you think about that also is what happens to those lenders in the retail buy-to-let market. Will they be able to serve those customers with more professional customers? A lot of them rely on systems. Will they be able to change their systems to accommodate an underwrite of a more sophisticated landlord? Will they have the underwriters with the skills and the expertise to assess those customers? So will people find a lot, having to go to different lenders than they would normally? Will those lenders be able to cope? Will the other landlords therefore see service deteriorate from lenders because a lot of that population now can no longer be served by the retail buy-to-let lenders? So I think when you come to the end of this year, I think landlords are going to notice a significant difference if you've got more than 4 properties. And it's not really had much airtime. And when I did my speech earlier, there wasn't that many people that seemed to be very aware of it. But it's worth becoming familiar with it because it is going to be a change for landlords. I think our model has always been to sort of serve the professional landlord, and it's very rare that we would lend to a landlord that isn't a sophisticated, large sort of landlord. So we've always had a bit of a commercial underwrite in our approach, and so therefore in some ways the changes will mean that ourselves and other lenders like us are probably better equipped for those changes. But for landlords, it does mean that they'll probably lose access to some of the very cheapest products and the simple straight-through processing that they've had the benefit of in the past. In their favour, there is more competition in the specialist lending markets now, so rates are coming down. But it will be more expensive than they used to get in retail. So it'll be a bit of an adjustment, and they'll just have to get used to providing more information, answering more questions, and having a different process to go through. But yeah, I mean, as you say, it's sort of the approach that we've always had, but I'm just sort of more interested in commentating on it as a market overall, really.
Well, as always, Stephen, thank you so much for your opinion and your input. We really value it here at Property Tribes. Thank you.
Much.